All right, well, thanks for joining me today. My name is Hanson Hosein. I'm the co-founder of the Communication Leadership Graduate Program at the University of Washington in Seattle. I also conceived a new 4-credit certificate program that we're launching this fall in emerging technologies and trends. My co-creators, Nika Kabiri and Sarah Lohman, conducted a robust information session about it in June, which is also available online if you want to reference that for any other things that we've covered. But I'll obviously be very happy to take any questions you might have about the certificate or anything else in the next few minutes. So whether it's the graduate program or this new leadership curriculum, I usually set my creative premise for any of this new thinking that I'm going to share with you this afternoon here in Toronto with this is a time of historic change, or we're experiencing a period of seismic shifts. And this has set the stage for so much that we've learned and shared over the years at the University of Washington as we think about meeting the massive challenges head on that we're facing and inspire people really to collaborate at scale to overcome them. And it's really the speed of change that has become so disruptive now. And we're experiencing nothing less than upheaval. And sometimes that can be invigorating, but more often than not, it's turbulent. So I'd like to take this moment to share my latest thinking about this with you. The headline for this session is how real-time leaders can make sense of forces beyond our control. It's how I'm going to frame my class this fall in leadership and emerging technologies and trends for our graduate students and the first cohort of certificate students. So you can consider this kind of a mini graduate seminar, but it won't be hopefully too long or too boring for you. And it's also the foundation for a new methodology and possible book concept I'm developing. And I tend to share my ideas publicly as I'm developing them. So I'm doing that with you today. You get the first access to that. We're recording actually right now part of that session for later viewing. And I welcome your questions and thoughts about anything you hear, as well as anything you might want to ask about that new certificate in the next few minutes. So I'm coming to you live from my parents' house in Toronto, Canada, which literally is, I'm in my parents' basement, for better and for worse. The hoops that my family, my kids and my wife and I had to jump through to get here from Seattle can give us some clues about the new world that is unfolding before our eyes as change really is accelerating. This global crisis we're all experiencing is giving us permission to break with how we did things in the past and not so long ago as well, in ways that we thought were unimaginable, or we thought at least would not happen for a few more years. Canada has long championed the longest undefended border in the world of the United States, and it's been closed for the last year until now. And to get here, I had to use an app to prove to authorities that we were vaccinated. And upon our arrival, the Canadian government asked us to use a private telehealth service to actually prove while we're doing our self-COVID test that we're doing it properly on camera. And then I had to report in daily through that app to health authorities about any possible symptoms. Plus, my 11-year-old son had to quarantine for 2 weeks because he's not vaccinated. And someone would call us during the first week to make sure we were doing so properly, and said that somebody might visit the house to make sure that we were quarantining. So some of these things might actually become part of our lives in the future, health monitoring and telehealth. But the shock to the system that we're experiencing right now through this global pandemic has really forced us to adopt emergent solutions much faster than we would have really been comfortable with, because we're so intent on getting back to school and to work in some sense of normalcy. And so we can see these seismic shifts happening right now, every day in what I'm saying is real time. And even now, the pushback against the unvaccinated is getting critical mass in terms of how much we want access to schools and restaurants and sports and even healthcare. We want proof. We want it fast. And so what we're seeing is this instant top-down policy supported by technology that is going to rearrange our institutions and how we exercise power. We also want to correct the things that didn't work so well before, such as issues of equity and the impact on our environment. So what I'm seeing right now is that the walls are going up. Outliers will pound at the gates. There'll be new winners and losers. We're already instinctively feeling the magnitude of these profound changes. Those protests against health requirements that we have in the United States, they're not just happening there. It's happening in Australia and Canada and France, because I think our understanding of freedom as we know it is being rewritten because of our understanding of power is as well. So the underlying question to my class and our new leadership certificate, and as well as my own direction, is this: when things are changing faster than ever all around us, how do we lead and communicate in real time? The danger is that if we do move too quickly, whichever way the wind is blowing, we'll actually get lost. That will lead to disaster as we lose our direction. And certainly leaders make decisions and communicate with their stakeholders all the time. But the window to react to this emergent change, all this breaking news, has contracted enormously. We no longer have the luxury to wait about how things will fully play out before we're compelled to act. And technology has put ourselves into a constant state of being live. We've got social media and the connected apps and all that data gathering, machine learning algorithms. So this new ecosystem has heightened the expectations of our employees, our constituents and stakeholders for faster responses, whether it's in our meetings and our presentations or even on screen as we're doing now. So despite our unprecedented access to information, we somehow lack the ability to accurately predict the future. And how do we navigate this turbulence when it seems easier than ever to make the wrong turn? So the methodology I'm drafting to deal with this new reality around leadership in a time of accelerated change has 16 principles. I'm not going to share them all with you today. I'm just going to preview 3 of them with you right now, and I'll share my browser with you to illustrate them. So just give me a second to make that happen. I'll go to this. And so this is my LinkedIn profile, and it's a photo I posted. My first principle of the 3 sounds pretty counterintuitive in terms of our notion of leadership, but it's to be powerless. To be powerless, without power. I practice this daily biking as much as I can to my professional engagements. So I took this photo of my folding bike that I brought with me here to Toronto in front of the grade school that I went to, and I shared it to LinkedIn. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn later, please feel free to do so. The reason I say be powerless is because as leaders, we want to protect as much as we already have and grow it as much as possible. And so we're more likely to be hostile to anything new or radical or outlandish. And any sign of upheaval will force us to question our place in the world that we've grown quite accustomed to. But by doing so, it leaves us unaware of things that might be gathering externally from us. And some of those things can be benign, such as emergent technologies. But those innovations can upend whole systems and threaten our very business model, as well as our sense of self. And some are obviously so disruptive, whether they're natural disturbances such as storms or a pandemic, or even fast gathering social movements. So that's why I like to bike. It gives me a sense of humility and respect for more powerful forces around me. I'm vulnerable, so I'm more aware. And that's what I'm thinking leaders need to be more than ever to be able to understand what's coming at them fast and furious. So I'll illustrate this more with the second principle. The first principle, again, was be powerless. The second one is look for signals. Now, if you were in my class right now, I would share 3 headlines from the week. I see it as a casual form of data gathering. I'm looking for signs and clues and bits of information that can give me a sense of direction in the heart of what can be sometimes a blinding storm. It's kind of a serendipity that really requires us to be hyper aware to the slightest change around us. So this article was in the Seattle Times in the last couple of days. And it's about how firefighters are using sensors on satellites, whether those are American or foreign satellites, as well as on aircraft and drones to monitor wildfires. They're calling it an experiment, and it's researchers in Washington who are funded by the US government. And what's interesting is that they're using it to track fires in real time in ways that weren't possible before. And they're deploying artificial intelligence to make sense of it. And so this caught my attention because obviously we're seeing more wildfires, especially this summer. But also there's some really interesting questions to ask about this. You know, what are we going to learn differently as fires do proliferate? What else can these technologies that they're experimenting with, can they be used for in terms of surveillance and looking in on things? What are some of the societal and privacy implications? You know, what counties, what local governments will use this really powerful technology in the future? And interesting to see the kind of partnerships that are surprising that might come out of it. The fact that they're using both American satellites as well as foreign satellites, I don't know which ones, is interesting in terms of what that allows us in terms of our reach and what those partnerships might allow us to do in the future. So I found that to be a really interesting headline and something that I would normally share with my students as I'm doing this. And a related headline from a more international source, I know we have somebody joining us from London, is from the Financial Times, which is one of my favorite newspapers. And what caught my attention about this in the headline was both the sort of very stark headline about a criminal lack of preparedness with the wildfires, as well as that position that person holds of a chief heat officer. They're not making the case for climate change anymore here, but for resilience as the devastation gets worse. And so about a decade ago, chief digital officers were all the rage in our world. And the fact that there are now chief heat officers in Athens and in Miami, Florida, as well as in the capital of Sierra Leone, of Freetown, sort of starts to tell you where policymakers and leadership are beginning to put their focus. And there's an interesting quote from the Prime Minister of Greece in this article, saying that we need to drastically change electricity production, construction, farming, and transport. And so when somebody of that level starts to talk about that kind of policy change on things that affect us all, it begins to get my attention. It's a vague, but it's a very early signal. And it's not about technology necessarily, but about trends that could shift because people in power or leaders are saying things have to change. And so I found that quite compelling as well. So other than these more traditional approaches to sort of to tracking, finding those signals, here are some other sources that I like to use and that I reference to our students as well. The Future Today Institute is really a superb source of information, and every week or month they publish a newsletter on things that we should be paying attention to in terms of technology and trends. I also require all my students to read their annual Tech Trends report, which is really amazing. Its founder, Amy Webb, was my debate partner a few years ago at a town hall as we argued against the resolution, Tech Will Change Us All. So I highly recommend the Future Today Institute. You can see the URL above there. Next is Factal. This is a breaking news startup that's based in Seattle, and it's used by chief security officers around the world. Its co-founder, Corey Bergman, used to advise our graduate program, and now I'm an advisor actually to this company. And I like this because a lot of they offer their service for free to anybody who comes from nonprofits, because if they see this as a way to get access to things as they're happening. This is better than watching a news network, say CNN or anything else, because they have access to the smallest of things that are happening at a very local level that might, if you put it all together, be great pattern recognition for what's coming next. And then there's this service from Signal Labs, which is a paid service, so you have to pay for it. But I like the fact that they focus on this thing called narrative intelligence. Its chief customer officer, Jennifer Granston, is a friend of mine and has guest lectured in my class before and will do so again this fall. But they really have access to some of the most interesting social media fire hoses to be able to sort of set up threats and opportunities in terms of what communicators need to know as they're making decisions on the latest things that are happening. So those are just three sources that I like to use as I'm doing this. So that was like my second principle, which really was looking for signals. And my final one that I want to share with you is very simple. It's about declaring our values. When we're in this uncharted territory, when things are changing so fast, and we don't know where we're headed, we need a map. We need something that can at least give us a sense of the direction we should take. And a few years ago, we created such a map for our graduate program through a 7-point declaration of communication leadership. And I actually see this as a mandate from those that we serve, that we as real-time leaders share the same values and principles and ethics with our constituents, so that no matter what comes next, the decisions we make on behalf of those people, on behalf of our stakeholders, will reflect our shared fundamental attributes as much as possible. And here you can see the 7 that we put together. We very much consulted with our communities. We did that. So in the class that I teach, it's actually the primary deliverable for the students. They have to choose an organization, research what matters most to it, and what are the possible implications around new technologies and trends in terms of disruptions, and then draft a declaration for that organization. So I call this deep tissue work, because we're digging in deep to what's come before for us as leaders within these organizations, what has made us what we are today, and what also may serve as a useful indicator for where we will be going tomorrow. And that thread of continuity is what really can make us more resilient and even more open to change. And so I see this as a directional tool that will fortify us for the journey ahead, allowing us to turn when necessary. So I really wanted to keep this brief as sort of a mini lecture and give you a sense of how I present and what we talk about and what we're thinking about right now in terms of what it means to be a real-time leader in this time of accelerated change, with those three principles, which are: one, to be powerless, at least to have a powerless mindset. I'm going to turn off my screen sharing here if I can do that. And then to look for signals, number two. And thirdly, to declare our values in a way that this is a map that can serve us really well when we are in uncharted territory. So when we're making decisions or communicating about something really new and unsettling, our constituents at least feel like we're coming from the same place that they are and that they can trust us as we're moving in that direction.